Hello and welcome to London Life TV. Today I'm with Geoffrey Pattinson, the Managing Director and founder of the Landmark Car Company in Chiswick. Geoffrey, thanks very much for letting us come to your beautiful showroom today. How long have you been in the classic car business?
Well, pretty well all my life, since I was a teenager.
Okay, how did you get involved in it?
Well, my father was really keen on cars, and I'm originally from Yorkshire. And I used to help him restore cars. He was a keen racer, so we used to go to the racetrack a lot. So really I was brought up, very involved in the whole car world.
Was there something in particular that drew you to classic cars rather than new cars?
Well, I think old cars have always had a lot more character than new cars, even going back quite a long time. A lot of the old classic cars, there were very few of them made, hundreds in some cases. And, they reflected the talents and the design thoughts of individuals rather than collectives. We opened Landmark Cars here in March last year, so we've been open just about a year. I did build this building originally for another car business that I got, and we never used it. I thought that, the car business in this difficult period we've had economically has been doing so well that that and my interest in it, I might as well combine the two things and go back full-time into the car business, which I have to say I find invigorating and very enjoyable.
And what's different about Landmark? Well, I mean, there's quite a few classic car dealerships around. What would you like to think is the unique thing about Landmark?
Well, we've got 450,000 people a day go past our window. And I think classic cars has become much more mainstream than it was in the past. And more people are really seriously thinking about a classic prestige car as opposed to a new car, instead of losing a huge amount of money on the car devaluing. If they buy a prestige classic car, they'll probably make some money.
And what advice would you give to someone who was perhaps thinking about buying that first classic car? Where do you start? Because it's quite a complex world, isn't it?
It is. Well, I would start by telling them to come and see us. But if they start with us, we have the best cars. We have a policy of only buying fully restored cars or really, really cracking cars with proper histories. We know where they've been, we know what condition they're in, and that would give people an idea of what you can buy for the money.
Okay, where do you source your cars from?
Well, they come from mainland Europe, the US, mainly. In the past, Britain was a centre of old car activity, but so many cars have been exported over the years that they're sprinkled everywhere around the world now. So we get them back. We had some back in from China and Japan a few weeks ago. And it's a truly international business now, so they all move around the world.
I'm sorry to be vulgar, but what kind of money would someone have to invest to get involved in the classic car market? Would it be hundreds of thousands, or could it be done for less?
The level at which we start is around about £100,000. But you can buy cars that are cheaper than that, and a lot of them are good investments. The only advice that I would give is try and buy one that's restored, because unless you're particularly handy yourself and you can restore them, you're never sure what the car's going to cost you if you've got to put it out for commercial restoration. There are many cars in the £20,000, £30,000 area. Sports cars tend to be the most desirable group, but there's space for everything. Some people want an enclosed car, some people want a big limousine. My advice would be to stick to sports cars and GT cars more than anything, more than any other group.
Okay, and if I was to buy that £20,000-30,000 car that's a future classic or a car that's becoming more valuable, do I need to know anything about how to keep the car? Does it need to be kept in an air-conditioned vault, or can I keep it at home in an ordinary garage?
Well, we've got a lot of clients who live in central London, and having a garage in central London is difficult. So we run a concierge service, which is where we can look after the car completely. We can put it into storage, make sure that it's kept clean, it's serviced, it's MOT'd, pretty well everything, so that all you really need to do is to come and pick it up, or indeed we can deliver it for you. But it just allows people without garages to be able to own classic cars, one or maybe more.
There have been some cases in recent years of classic cars' pedigrees being brought into question, particularly racing heritage racing Jaguars. Is that something that should be a concern to people, a car's pedigree?
Yes, I think you've got to take some precautions just to make sure that the car is exactly as it's described. But it's a very complicated area. I mean, nowadays people like the idea of matching numbers, which is chassis and engine numbers matching. Well, you know, for a car that's 40 or 50 years old, sometimes that's difficult. With a racing car, it's almost impossible. The most important thing, though, I think, is that the identity of the car is continuous, even though parts of it may have been replaced over the years, that its identity is continuous, it's provable, and people are not going to argue with the fact that you know, it's a little bit like a spade you've had for an awful long time. You know, you may have changed the handle, you may have changed bits and pieces on it, but it's essentially the same spade.
So Geoffrey, what about US imports? Are they viable for this country, or should British collectors just be looking at right-hand drive models?
Some American cars are great cars. The problem with lots of American cars is that there were huge numbers of them made. The Americans were first to really mass produce cars, and where there's a huge number of something, that tends to have an effect on its value. The European cars, there's not really very many of them made, but generally it doesn't make any difference whether it's left or right-hand drive. The market for these cars is worldwide now, and you know, some countries are happy to have left-hand drives. We're selling cars to Japan, who prefer right-hand drive cars, and also Russia, who want left-hand drive cars, so they're pretty well going everywhere.
So Geoffrey, does Landmark also offer restoration services? There have been a number of TV shows recently about, you know, how much money can be made from restoring a car yourself. Is that viable, or is it just good telly, really?
Well, I think it's just good telly. We find that the cost of restoration goes up and up every year and becomes more and more difficult to do. We don't offer restoration services. We'll recommend people that our clients can go to. We don't offer it. We restore cars for ourselves to sell, but we don't offer it because you can never really tell what it's going to cost until you've got it finished.
Okay. Now, here's an interesting one. I drive a Range Rover. Should I hang on to it? Is there any market for vintage SUVs?
There is a market for vintage SUVs, but I wouldn't recommend that you hang on to it. The market for SUVs are really from the 70s, Range Rovers in particular. They've become immensely popular in the last few years, and for a fully restored, a complete nut and bolt restoration, early Range Rover, you know, they can be in the £60,000 or £70,000 range.
Really? Okay. So let's imagine I've got a bottomless pit of money. I want a car that's a classic, but I also want to use it every day. What should I buy? What would you recommend?
Well, there's a number of them, but I suppose the one that most people would understand is to go for a 300 SL Mercedes Gullwing. You know, they made 1,300 of them. Most of them still exist. They're a very iconic car. That and the 300 SL Roadster. One of the most popular ones to go for nowadays, that everybody knows, is an E-Type Jaguar, a Roadster. If you get one that's fully restored, I think they're going to do quite well in the future. A lot of E-Types have been absorbed into a lot of modern art museums now because they're considered to be such an iconic shape.
And finally, Geoffrey, what about bringing classics up to date? I mean, I've got a Triumph Stag that, you know, is a beautiful car but woefully unreliable. Can I get that made more like a modern car by having a new engine fitted, or the bits that didn't work before maybe replaced? Is that going to devalue it, or should I just not bother?
Well, I think you can stick to all the main component parts. Most of the problems people used to have with them were actually simple things. Electrics was always a problem, and they're really very, very simple. They're not difficult to look after. Modern oils mean that the engines don't wear as much as they used to. So there is a sort of treatment, a modern treatment you can give to a classic car that will make it much, much more reliable than it was in its day. But electrics was the big problem with most of them.
And if you do change big components, does it make it a less valuable car?
You can change lots of components. If you start changing engines so the numbers don't match, that can have an effect on it. But everything else, no. I mean, if you rebuild an engine, as long as you've got the original block, you know, you can put in new pistons. You can pretty well recondition it, as long as you actually keep the essential main components being really, you know, the chassis with all the chassis numbers and the engine block. But apart from that, most people want to try and make their old cars, their classic cars, more roadworthy so they can use them in modern road traffic conditions.
Okay. Jeffrey, thanks very much for talking to us today.
Dominic, it's been a pleasure.